You don't need to shout to control someone. Silence, when heavy, can imprison more than any chain. Kafka always knew, the true prison is rarely visible. When you were little, you might have felt that look from your parents that said it all without words. That look that made you stop what you were doing instantly. No words were spoken, but the message came through with full force. That's power. That's silent control. Franz Kafka, a writer who lived long ago, wrote strange stories about people who felt trapped, even when there were no walls around them. He understood something very important. Often, the things that control us most are invisible. They're not metal chains that bind our arms, but ideas, expectations, and unspoken rules that imprison our minds and hearts. Think about how differently you behave when you walk into a library. No one needs to tell you, be quiet, you already know. The silence of the place is already a powerful command that everyone obeys. Or when you walk into a classroom and everyone is sitting in neat rows, no one needs to tell you to sit in a row, too. You simply obey a rule that no one had to say out loud. This is the world Kafka showed us. A world where we are controlled not by shouts or orders, but by silences and invisible rules. A world where the strongest cage is the one you don't even realize exists. Today, we'll delve into this strange yet familiar world. We'll understand how silence can be a powerful weapon, how we can be manipulated without hearing a single word, and, most importantly, how we can open our eyes to see the invisible bars that surround us. Because the first step to being free is realizing when you are not. The everyday manipulation that comes not from direct orders, but from glances, absences, and silent expectations. Like in the work routine, when everyone obeys without anyone saying anything. Like in relationships, when the weight of indifference speaks louder than any words. Have you ever felt that tightness in your chest when someone important to you stopped talking? It wasn't a shouting match, it was worse. It was the silence. That silence that hurts more than any scream, that makes you wonder what you did wrong, that makes you want to change your ways just so that person will smile at you again. This is the invisible pain that Kafka knew so well, the pain that leaves no marks on the body, but wounds the soul. Imagine a classroom where no one talks to a child. No one says we don't like you, but everyone walks away when the child arrives. No one needs to say a word for the child to understand the cruel message. Silence is punishment enough. Or imagine a family where love is never spoken aloud. No one says I love you, no one hugs, no one compliments. There are no written rules prohibiting displays of affection, but everyone lives as if there were. Effective silence becomes an invisible prison. In the workplace, how often do we see people working overtime without being asked? The boss didn't say stay late, but the disappointed look on his face when someone leaves on time is enough of a command. Manipulation is in the air, invisible but powerful. On social media, silence also manipulates. When you post something and no one likes or comments, this digital silence can make you change your behavior, your opinions, even your appearance in future photos. No one said change, but the lack of reaction was enough of a command. Kafka understood this silent pain. In his stories, characters are often controlled not by tyrants shouting orders, but by invisible systems, by unspoken expectations, by rules that everyone follows without question. The scariest thing is that we often don't realize when we're being manipulated by silence. It's like a fish that doesn't know it's in water. It's so used to it that it no longer even notices. It would only feel the water if it were removed from it. Similarly, we often only notice silent manipulation when it stops, when someone finally breaks the silence and says out loud what was happening. If this has already spoken to you, subscribe now and leave a like so you don't miss the next videos. The cage was looking for a bird, a simple yet suffocating phrase. You don't need someone to point a finger for you to feel trapped. Often the cage already exists before you're even born, and the bird enters on its own. This was Kafka's vision. We are shaped by forces that say nothing but demand everything. Franz Kafka was a writer born in Prague, an ancient European city, over 100 years ago. He worked in an office during the day and wrote his strange and profound stories at night. Many of them revolve around ordinary people who suddenly find themselves trapped in absurd situations. In one of his most famous stories, a man wakes up transformed into a giant insect. In another, a man is arrested and tried without ever knowing what his crime was. These stories sound like nightmares, but Kafka was trying to show us something important about real life. One of Kafka's most powerful lines is, "The cage was looking for a bird." Think about that for a moment. We usually think that first the bird exists, and then someone builds a cage to imprison it. But Kafka turns that idea on its head. What if the cage already existed? What if the prisons that confine us were already waiting for us before we were even born? It's as if Kafka is saying, look around you. The expectations of how you should be, what you should study, how you should behave, what job you should behave, what job you should have, all of this was already there before you arrived. Society already had a ready-made form waiting for you to fit into it. The scariest thing is that we often enter these cages of our own free will. No one forces us, no one shouts orders. The cage is simply there, silent, and we enter because everyone around us has done the same, because it's expected of us. because it's normal. Kafka understood how we are shaped by silent forces that don't need to shout to control us. Forces like family traditions that dictate what you should be when you grow up, or the unwritten school rules that determine who's popular and who isn't, or the beauty standards we see in magazines and on social media, which, without saying a word, make us feel inadequate. These silent forces are like invisible hands that mold us, like a sculptor molds clay. And the saddest thing, for Kafka, is that we often don't even realize we're being molded. We think we're free, that we make our own choices, when in fact we're just following the path silently laid out for us. The cage was looking for a bird. This quote invites us to look at our lives and ask, what invisible cages am I living in? What are the silent bars that limit my dreams, my choices, my way of seeing the world? And most importantly, are these cages really necessary, or can I learn to live outside them? The absurdity manifests itself today in social media, which manipulates us through the silence of algorithms, in endless forms that force us to follow invisible rules, in the aimless life where we follow chains without realizing it. Manipulation doesn't require shouting, only invisible norms that we already accept as natural. If Kafka were alive today, he might be fascinated and horrified by our modern cages. They are even more invisible than those of his time, even more silent, and perhaps for that reason, even more powerful. Think about the social media platforms you use every day. They don't shout orders at you, do they? No one forces you to post perfect photos, count how many likes you get, or feel that pang of sadness when your friend gets more comments than you. And yet, millions of people change their behavior, their clothes, their favorite places, even their opinions, just to please the silent judge of the networks, the algorithm. The algorithm doesn't speak, it doesn't give orders. It simply decides, silently, who will be seen and who will be ignored. And without anyone having given it a command, we begin to dance to its silent tune. Or think about the endless forms we fill out. For studies, for work, for travel, for almost everything in life. These forms don't shout at you, but rather control your life with their rigid rules. If you don't fill them out exactly as they ask, you're out. If your name doesn't fit in the designated space, that's your problem. If your life doesn't fit into the given options, you have to force it to fit. The form doesn't speak, it doesn't explain, it simply silently demands that you adapt to its rules. And what about the daily routine we follow? Waking up early, taking a crowded bus or subway, working all day, returning home tired, sleeping and starting all over again the next day. No one forces you to live this way. There's no written law that says life has to be this meaningless rush. But everyone follows this rhythm as if there were no choice, as if it were natural, inevitable. The most powerful manipulation is the one we don't have to obey. We simply accept it as the way things are. Even our conversations are shaped by manipulative silences. How many important topics do you avoid discussing with your family? How many truths do you keep from telling your friends to avoid causing discomfort? No one forbade these conversations. No one said don't talk about it. But silence around these topics is command enough. And so, without realizing it, we limit our thoughts, our words, our very worldview. Kafka would see our modern world as the realization of his darkest nightmares, a world where we are controlled not by tyrants shouting orders, but by invisible systems that need not say a word to completely shape our lives. The absurd, for Kafka, is precisely this: living in cages that we ourselves helped to build, following rules that no one had to impose, limiting our freedom without anyone having thrown chains upon us. Comment here, which part of your life seems most like absurd theater? It's not just the world that manipulates us. Often it's our own minds that put invisible leashes on us, the fear of disappointment, the need for acceptance, the obsession with appearing normal. The silence that traps us can be the echo of our own thoughts. You believe the system imprisons you, but maybe it's you who locks the door. Here we come to the most difficult part of our journey, the darkest turn Kafka presents us with. What if the cruelest jailer is not outside, but inside us? Imagine a bird that has lived its entire life in a cage. One day someone opens the cage door. The bird can fly to freedom, but often it doesn't. It remains inside the cage, even with the door open. Why? Because the real prison is no longer the cage bars, but the fear that lives within. Fear of the unknown, fear of not knowing how to live outside the cage, fear of disappointing those who have always cared for it. Likewise, we are often the ones who keep our own cages closed. Even when the opportunity for freedom presents itself, we don't seize it. Think about how many times you've held yourself back from doing something you wanted to do because you were afraid of what others would think. No one said don't do that. It was your own mind that created that invisible rule. Or how many times you've punished yourself for not being perfect, for not getting the best grades, for not being the most popular, for not having the ideal body. No one demanded this perfection of you. It was you who created this impossible expectation. Our minds are experts at creating invisible cages. Fear of failure keeps us from trying new things. Fear of rejection prevents us from showing who we truly are. Fear of being different forces us to pretend to be like everyone else, even when it makes us unhappy. And the saddest thing is that these mental cages are so silent, so invisible, that we often don't even realize we're trapped in them. We think we are like this, that it's our personality, when in reality they are just invisible bars that our minds have created over time. Kafka understood this profoundly. In his stories, the characters are often their own prisons. They could escape their absurd situations, but something inside them, guilt, fear, shame, a distorted sense of duty, keeps them trapped. As a thinker who came after Kafka said, "You believe the system imprisons you, but perhaps it is you who lock the door." This is the darkest turn, realizing that often we do not need external executioners because we are already our own executioners. Our thoughts may be silent, but they are incredibly powerful. They can imprison us more effectively than any concrete prison. They can make us small, fearful, and complacent, even when nothing in the outside world forces us to be so. The good news is that if we are the ones who often build our mental cages, we are also the ones who can begin to dismantle them. If the jailer is within, the key to freedom may also be within, but to do so, we must first recognize these invisible prisons. We must listen to the manipulative silences within our own minds. We must question the I can'ts and I shouldn'ts we whisper to ourselves without even realizing it. There's no point in running away from emptiness or manipulation. It doesn't disappear. The only way is to face it. To realize when silence isn't peace, but control. To understand when the absence of words is a veiled command. Courage isn't about freeing yourself from everything, but about seeing the invisible bars and still choosing how to move forward. We've reached the moment of confrontation. And no, we're not talking about fighting other people, but something much more difficult, confronting the manipulative silences that shape our lives. Kafka shows us that running away doesn't solve anything. We can change schools, jobs, cities, even countries, but invisible cages follow us, because many of them are within us, or so deeply ingrained in the way society works that they appear everywhere. True confrontation begins with a simple, revolutionary act, noticing, realizing when silence isn't just a pause in conversation, but a form of control. Realizing when the absence of words carries a powerful message. Realizing when we are being shaped, not by direct orders, but by silent expectations. It's like waking up in a world where you can suddenly see the air. It's always been there. You've always breathed that air, but you've never really noticed its presence. Similarly, when we begin to notice the manipulative silences, it's as if an invisible world becomes visible to our eyes. You begin to notice how your friends use silence to change your mind. How your family uses silence to maintain traditions that may no longer make sense. How society uses silence to maintain inequalities that could be challenged. But it doesn't stop there. The most difficult confrontation is with the silences within ourselves. Those invisible rules we follow without question. Those fears that limit us without us realizing it. Those critical voices inside our heads that tell us we're not good enough. That we don't deserve to be happy. That we should always please others before thinking of ourselves. Confrontation doesn't necessarily mean destroying everything and starting from scratch. Kafka doesn't teach us to tear down all the walls and live without any structure. That would just be exchanging one absurdity for another. The true confrontation is more subtle. It's seeing the invisible barriers and still choosing how to navigate them. It's understanding that some rules are necessary for us to live in society, but not all of them need to be accepted without question. It's realizing that some silences are healthy and necessary, but others are forms of manipulation that we need to challenge. Courage, in this sense, is not living without limits or rules. It's having the clarity to distinguish between the limits that protect us and those that merely imprison us without reason. It's having the strength to break oppressive silences and create new spaces where words can flow freely. It's having the wisdom to accept that some structures are necessary, even if imperfect, while working to improve them. Confronting manipulative silences is like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly you see objects that have always been there, but you've been stumbling over them without understanding what they are. The light doesn't change the objects, but it completely changes your relationship with them. Likewise, confronting silences doesn't change the world immediately, but it does forever change the way you live in it. Write in the comments, do you face the void or run away from it? Kafka doesn't offer salvation, but he does offer insight. He shows that in the absurd and in silence there is a chance for awakening. The void can be a mirror, revealing who you truly are, without imposed masks. When you understand the game, you are no longer just a victim. Manipulation loses its power when you name it. If you were expecting Kafka to offer us a magical solution to escape all invisible cages, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Kafka isn't a self-help author with simple steps to a perfect life. His vision is more complex, more realistic, and therefore more valuable. The hidden teaching in Kafka's works is not a formula for salvation, but something perhaps even more precious. A new way of seeing, as if he were offering us special glasses that allow us to see through the invisible bars that have always surrounded us. And this vision, in itself, is already a form of liberation. Because when you see the cage, you're no longer completely trapped in it. You may not be able to destroy it immediately, but now you know it exists. You know there's an outside. You know there are alternatives, even if they're difficult to reach. More than that, Kafka shows us that the absurd and the void, however frightening they may be, contain a precious opportunity, the chance to awaken to who we truly are, without the masks that society forces us to wear. Think of a mirror. When you look in it, you see your reflection. But what if you could look deeper? What if you could see beyond appearances, beyond what others expect of you, beyond even what you believe yourself to be? That's what emptiness can offer, a mirror to your soul, revealing parts of yourself that were hidden beneath layers of expectations and silent rules. When you feel lost, when the rules don't make sense, when the world seems absurd, these difficult moments are also moments of possibility. They are moments when masks can fall, when you can question what you've always accepted as truth, when you can begin to find your own voice amidst so much silence. Kafka understood that silent manipulation only works as long as it remains invisible. It's like a spell that loses its power when it's named. When you realize you're being manipulated by a friend, a commercial, a social network, or even your own mind, the spell begins to break. Manipulation loses its power when you recognize it for what it truly is. That's why Kafka's stories, however dark, contain a strange hope. They show us the absurd not to make us give up, but to wake us up, to make us see what we didn't see before, to make us question what we once accepted without thinking. And this awakening, this new vision, changes everything. Not because all the cages suddenly disappear, but because your relationship with them changes profoundly. You go from unwitting victim to conscious observer. You begin to understand the game, and little by little, you can begin to change it, even if only within your small circle of influence. As a philosopher after Kafka said, freedom is not doing what one wants, but wanting what one does. Perhaps this is the most realistic liberation we can hope for, not living without any limitations, which would be impossible, but consciously choosing which limitations make sense for our lives, which silences we respect and which we challenge. And you, how many times have you kept quiet to avoid rejection? How many times have you obeyed without being asked? How many times have you felt that someone's silence manipulated you more than harsh words? Silence can be a prison, but it can also be a weapon. The difference lies in who uses it. Let's bring this whole conversation closer to you, to your life, your days, your feelings. Because Kafka didn't just write about a distant, abstract world, he wrote about human experiences that we all feel, even without realizing it or naming them. Think about your school life. How many times have you changed your mind about something just to fit in? No one said, change your mind or you'll be rejected. It was a silent command, a disapproving look, a chuckle when you spoke your mind, and just like that, without words, you were shaped. Or think about your family. How many times have you noticed that certain topics simply aren't discussed? No one made a list of forbidden topics. No one said, we don't talk about that. But somehow everyone knows which silences should be maintained, which questions shouldn't be asked. And so, without words, your worldview has been limited. In your friendships, how many times have you felt the crushing weight of silence from someone important? Maybe a friend who stopped responding to your messages. Maybe someone you admired who suddenly started ignoring you. There was no fight, no explanation, just silence. And that silence hurt more than any harsh words could. Or think about how you treat yourself. How many times have you criticized yourself for not being normal, for not fitting into society's expectations? No one handed you a manual telling you exactly how you should be, and yet you feel the weight of these silent expectations, as if they were rules written in stone. Kafka understood this universal experience of being shaped by silences, of feeling the weight of unspoken expectations, of living in a world where the most important rules are precisely those no one needed to write. But here's something important that Kafka also shows us. Silence isn't just a prison. It can also be a weapon, a tool, a space of power. When you consciously choose to remain silent rather than follow the crowd, you are using silence as a form of resistance. When you choose not to respond to provocation, you are using silence as a shield. When you create a moment of stillness to hear your own thoughts amidst the noise of the world, you are using silence as a refuge. The crucial difference lies in who uses silence. When it's imposed on you without you realizing it, it can be a prison. But when you choose it consciously, it can be a source of strength. And perhaps this is the most powerful shift we can make, moving from being victims of silence to its masters. Learning to recognize when we are being manipulated by the silence of others, and at the same time learning to use our own silence not to manipulate, but to create spaces of authenticity, reflection, and true connection. Because in the end, what Kafka teaches us isn't just about invisible cages and silent manipulation. It's also about the possibility of finding our own voice, even if sometimes that voice expresses itself through silence. Chosen silence, a conscious silence, a silence that doesn't imprison, but liberates. There are silences that scream louder than any voice. The secret is not to run away from them, but to learn to listen to them without getting lost. This is the Kafkaesque, understanding that manipulation only works when we accept its weight as absolute truth. We've reached the culmination of our journey through Kafkaesque silences. It's time to understand the deeper message he left us. the wisdom hidden in his strange and disturbing stories. There are silences that scream louder than any voice. This phrase captures the essence of what we've been exploring. Silence isn't emptiness. It's not absence. It's a powerful presence that can communicate more than 1,000 words: a father's disapproving look, a friend's indifference, the void left by someone who's gone, society's unspoken expectations. All these silences scream, shape, and command. But Kafka goes further. He doesn't just show us the power of silence, he shows us a way to deal with it. The secret is not to run away from them, but to learn to listen to them without getting lost. Escaping manipulative silences rarely works. You can change schools, but you'll encounter unspoken rules at the next one. You can change friends, but you'll face unspoken expectations from the next group. You can even change countries, but you'll discover that every culture has its own oppressive silences, just in different forms. Kafka suggests a more subtle and powerful path: learning to listen to these silences, paying attention to what isn't being said, noticing the empty spaces between words, feeling the weight of what's unsaid. And this is the crucial point, doing so without getting lost in them. Because there's a real danger in becoming hypersensitive to the world's silences. You might start to see manipulation everywhere. You might become paranoid, suspicious, and isolated. You might end up building your own invisible cage, made not of social expectations, but of fear and suspicion. Kafkaesque wisdom lies in finding balance, being aware of manipulative silences without letting that awareness become another form of imprisonment. Listening to the unsaid without always assuming the worst. Questioning invisible rules without rejecting all forms of structure. And here we come to the fundamental key. Manipulation only works when we accept its weight as absolute truth. Think about it for a moment. When someone looks at you disapprovingly, and you automatically change your behavior, what happened? You accepted that person's silent judgment as truth. When you avoid doing something different for fear of what others will think, what's happening? You're accepting society's silent expectations as absolute law. Silent manipulation only has power over us when we believe it without question. When we accept that a disapproving look truly means we're wrong. When we accept that someone's silence truly means we're unworthy. When we accept that society's unspoken rules are more important than our own inner truth. But what if we didn't accept it? What if we looked at these silences not as absolute truths, but for what they really are? Just opinions, just expectations, just conventions that may or may not make sense for our lives. Therein lies the true liberation Kafka offers us. It's not escaping all the cages, which would be impossible as long as we live in society. It's realizing that many of these cages only hold power because we believe in them. Because we accept them as inevitable reality instead of seeing them as human constructs that can be questioned, modified, and sometimes even ignored. As a Kafka character might say, the door was open all the time. I only believed it was locked because I never tried to open it. Silence manipulates, but it also liberates. It's up to you to decide which side of the scale you fall on. Kafka shows us that even the invisible prison can be illuminated by consciousness. We've reached the end of our journey through Kafkaesque silences, invisible cages, and wordless manipulations that shape our lives. It's time to piece together the threads and understand what we can take from this exploration into our lives, our relationships, and our way of being in the world. Silence is a neutral force, like fire or water. It can build or destroy, imprison or liberate. The same silence that can be used to manipulate and control can also become a space for reflection, self-discovery, and peaceful resistance. When you choose to be silent instead of following the crowd, you are using silence as liberation. When you create moments of stillness to hear your inner voice amidst the noise of the world, you are using silence as a path to self-knowledge. When you choose not to respond to provocations or gossip, you are using silence as a form of peace. The crucial point, as Kafka shows us, is not to eliminate all silences from our lives, which would be not only impossible, but undesirable. The point is to develop awareness of them, to realize when we are being shaped by manipulative silences, to understand when our own unspoken words are affecting others, to choose which silences we want to maintain and which we want to break. Kafka lived in an absurd world where rules seemed arbitrary and authorities incomprehensible. His stories reflect this feeling of being trapped in a system that makes no sense, yet still holds absolute power over our lives. But Kafka's brilliance lies in showing that, even in the most absurd and oppressive situations, there is a form of inner freedom, a freedom that begins with awareness, with a clear perception of the absurd, of invisible cages, of manipulative silences. As he wrote in one of his diaries, a cage went out looking for a bird. This strange and powerful image reminds us that often the structures that imprison us existed before us, waiting for us to fit into them. But it also reminds us that by recognizing the cage for what it is, we are already taking the first step toward not being just the bird that allows itself to be captured. Consciousness is the light that illuminates the invisible prison. It doesn't necessarily destroy its walls immediately, but it allows us to see where we are, to understand the limits imposed on us, and to begin to imagine possibilities beyond them. And perhaps this is Kafka's most valuable legacy to us today. The idea that, even in a world that often seems absurd and oppressive, we have the capacity to develop consciousness, to question what seems unquestionable, to find small spaces of authenticity and freedom. Even within structures we cannot completely change. Silence manipulates, but it also liberates. The cage imprisons, but it can also be illuminated by consciousness. The absurd confuses, but it can also awaken. It's up to you to decide which side of the scale you fall on, whether you'll simply be shaped by the world's silences or learn to listen to them without getting lost in them. Whether you'll accept all the invisible cages as absolute truths or begin to question which of them truly make sense in your life. The Kafkaesque journey doesn't promise a guaranteed happy ending, a perfect world where all manipulation disappears. It promises something perhaps more valuable: the possibility of living with our eyes open, even when what we see isn't comfortable. The possibility of making conscious choices, even when options are limited. The possibility of finding one's own voice, even in a world full of deafening silences. If this message touched you, comment here, "I am not the cage." And don't forget to watch the video that's on the card now.